Chapter 40. I didn't say it was a long story, she said defensively. No, but you said it was funny, Colin snapped. Do I look amused? Daryl, she twisted her head to an angle, studying him. Little bit. But I figured your face was just shaped that way. You're a smiley kind of guy. He turned a cold shoulder to her, staring out across the formerly green and lush valley. Fully half of it was on fire now. The smoke was just rising to the level that the smell was overpowering. It was producing enough heat to make him sweat even at this altitude, too. At this rate it wouldn't be too long before he had to retreat back under Atraximos's wards, which Colin hoped would protect the air quality. They did everything else. How many people live down there? He asked. Isaiah said something about bandits. You were worried? Vanamux snorted incredulously. About bandits? You're both right, Daryl, she interjected. It's not just garden variety bandits who come to Dragonvale, but the worst of the worst, the ones so wanted in other countries that living right under dragons is a better alternative. This valley is a staging area and headquarters for planning raids on the outlying communities. Also, they all have their encampments right along the rivers for exactly this reason. You burn down the valley fairly often, huh? We try to avoid it, Vanamux said sourly. Atraximos threw a fit every time. It being all charred spoiled his view. Not that it was even usually our fault. If it wasn't one of us, it was a lightning strike or some idiot mortal with a campfire. The fact it went up so easily says it was overdue. What's it been, Roshi? 5 years, 10? Something like that. Overdue? Colin exclaimed. You're not seriously trying to convince me the forest is supposed to burn down at regular intervals? Both dragons swiveled their necks to stare at him incredulously. Yes? Vanamux said, frowning. Oh, that's right, you're from Rivak. Not a lot of woodlands down south. Daryl, she grinned at him. Yes, Pants, fires are part of a forest's life cycle. Most of the trees will survive. The rest will make room for new ones. It clears out the built-up underbrush, which also creates room for new growth, and ash rejuvenates the nutrients in the soil. There are some plant and tree species which require fire to propagate properly. Now I know you're making that up. I don't know about that last part, plants requiring fire, Vanamux grumbled, but then, I don't really know botany. The rest is correct, though. Go ask Phanerexa. Daryl, she protested. She knows way too much about a lot of things and is not motivated to keep us out of trouble. And speaking of that, just for the record, Vanamax was the only one breathing fire. Vanamux turned to hiss at her. Yeah, be mad about it if you want, but you were. Colin grunted. Delivered in the defensive tone of someone who definitely had nothing to do with why he was breathing fire. Daryl, she stared at him with her mouth open, then deliberately swiveled her head to gaze nonchalantly out over the burning valley. Vanamux grinned. Coughing, Colin waved a hand in front of his face to waft away smoke, which didn't really work. Right. Well, the timekeepers built everything with ludicrous precision. Are these doors airtight? How would we know? Vanamux demanded. I don't think we've ever bothered to shut them. I assure you, we're not bothered by smoke, Daryl, she added with a huge draconian smirk. Time to find out. This household now has a human guest for whom air is a necessity. And, it turns out godlings need oxygen, too. Commander. The ghost leader of the Phantom Legion materialized from nowhere before him, saluting. I need these doors shut as soon as I'm back inside, said Colin. Station guards on both sides, and open them for any of the household who need to get through. Once all this dissipates and the air is clear, we'll keep them open again. The commander saluted him, turned, and made a series of rapid gestures at the 2 ghost soldiers who stood flanking the door. Both saluted in response. Any other entrances? Colin asked. They are all on the other side of the mountain, said Daryl. We'll be able to smell it everywhere, but the actual smoke won't make it that far around unless the weather does something really weird. And the library door won't let any smoke through anyway. Emmy has weatherproof enchantments layered on it to protect her precious books. I think the bath is the only one that can't be closed off. Right, sounds good. Guess I'd better go check on our guest anyway. In or out, you two? The dragons exchanged a look over his head as he stepped forward toward the open doors, then silently followed him back inside. Wow, Phenorexa drawled shortly thereafter when Colin had updated her. I honestly thought Vanomax would go more than a few minutes before causing a new catastrophe. Though in hindsight I don't know why. They claim the forest needs regular fires as part of its life cycle. Yes, well, that's true enough, she agreed. Actually, it's been a few years, hasn't it? So it would have happened before much longer either way. That doesn't mean we can't blame the idiot who was spewing fire everywhere, of course, it merely adds some context. So that's why I smelled smoke, Percy said, frowning in concern. I thought maybe that was normal. Dragonfire has a different scent than wood smoke, Colin said with a smile. More not quite sulfurous. More mineral. Does that make any sense? Not really. He blinked, Phenorexa grinned, and Percy just looked nonplussed. I guess I'll probably find out soon enough, she continued after a moment. Hopefully not too close. So, does Vanomax tend to cause a lot of trouble? This is more acting out than he's done in a very long time, Phenorexa sneered. Not that he's good for anything on his best day, but generally? No, things are usually quieter around here. We are in something of a transitional state these days. I don't think you should talk about your brother that way, Percy stated. Phenorexa gaped at her in astonishment. Nobody wants to be useless, the princess continued earnestly. Well, maybe some people do, but I don't think that's very many. And even so, it hurts to be told that you are. If he was actually useless he'd be lazy and nobody would hear from him. If he's going out doing foolish things and causing problems, he probably wants to help, or at least be involved. It sounds like he just doesn't know how. Both of them regarded her in silence, Colin smiling, Phenorexa still looking stupefied. That's what I think, anyway, Percy added uncomfortably. Well, Phenorexa finally said, you're quick to forgive. I don't think so, Percy said with a frown. The flocks say that it's better to give forgiveness than receive it, but no, I'm not there yet. What he did to me was very upsetting. I'm just starting to be over being terrified enough to get angry. None of that means I can't think about why he might go out and do something so awful, though. That's a separate matter. As it happens, I think you're right, said Colin, but all that is a conversation for another time. Since we're good and buttoned up in here at least until the smoke clears, we should work on getting this place more comfortable for you. And for me, for that matter. This does seem like a curious way to set up your sleeping arrangements, Percy commented, turning to study Colin's enormous fur-padded bed in the center of the open space. And I've been curious to see how this works, Phenorexa added. I've never actually been in here until today, much less observed the wards in action. Really? Percy asked. Wasn't this your father's room? He wasn't a father in the sense that any human culture I'm aware of means it. None of us ever had a positive interaction with him. Wow. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that Traximos the Dread was a miserable person, but you'd think things would be different among family. Some of history's greatest villains were complex people with surprising depths, Percy. Traximos was not one of those. He just sucked. While they talked, Colin had been focusing on the wards. Thus concentrating, he could feel the hoard itself, his hoard. His ability to find and retrieve items from the storage vaults also applied to the stuff out here. And, he observed, to the various racks, stands, and display cases as well. All of it was his to move, to place at will. He didn't even need to organize the storage. It would take instructions as simple as in or out of the main room and arrange everything for optimal efficiency. As someone who'd had to organize a few storage rooms in his day, this was the greatest magic imaginable. Percy gasped when everything began to disappear. It wasn't quite instantaneous, for the whole lot of it. The effect passed through the rooms in waves, treasures and their displays vanishing like falling dominoes. It took barely a second for the entire collection to be removed, leaving the huge vault bare. Mostly. You missed a spot, Phenorexa pointed out, grinning. Or, don't tell me those things are impervious to the wards. Timekeeper materials are indestructible, but I've never heard of them being impossible to teleport. No, Colin said, looking over at the section of the chamber in which the various timekeeper devices and objects were still on display, the silent Omega looming in their midst. Honestly, just because I don't want to live in a museum doesn't mean I don't like to see artifacts displayed. And those are nifty. That's a word, Phenorexa agreed, shooting him a sidelong smirk. That's so strange, Percy mused. The room looks smaller with less stuff in it. Doesn't that seem strange? It seems like it should be the opposite. In addition to the timekeeper section, Colin had left his bed where it had been, now surrounded by ominous emptiness, and off to the side stood his improvised sitting area with its gaudily ostentatious furnishings. Also the neatly labeled map still stood by the door. He now knew it was tied into the ward network, would be able to feel that even if he couldn't see it neatly showing the altered contents of the room. Now comes the problem? Phenorexa asked when Colin trailed off. I'm looking through the collection, he said, frowning. I've hit a bit of a snag, yes. But you're not doing, oh, is this a mental interface? Percy asked. You just think about it and you can move things around. The court mage told me that's incredibly hard to set up. She made fun of me for asking. Atraximos was a dragon, Phenorexa said. He was no Emeralaphine, but if you live for a long enough time as an apex power, you tend to acquire interesting abilities. Where did it all go? Some kind of dimensional storage, like a bag of holding? Nothing as exotic as that. There's a whole row of chambers about this size deeper in the mountain, Colin said, still frowning at his inner ward interface. You could walk them through normal corridors, though he kept all the doors locked. No reason not to, I suppose, when the contents can be retrieved this easily. No, the issue I've encountered is that he's got everything in there except building materials. Why did you expect to find building materials in his hoard? Phenorexa asked, grinning even more widely. I guess that's one of those assumptions that stops making sense when you actually think about it. Tiavatharis has altered her chamber with permanent structures, but apparently Atraximos wasn't planning on doing the same. This is going to make the core task more difficult than I thought. There are a good few folding screens in there, all very expensive and fancy, a few enchanted. It's not the same as walls, though. Well, none of it should be hard to acquire, it'll just take a while. Percy, I think the best I'll be able to do at least at first is get us set up with separate encampments, I guess. It'll be less private than I'd hoped. Now, let's not give up prematurely, Phenorexa interrupted. Just because you don't have something suitable right at hand doesn't mean you don't have options. For one thing, you have 3 highly capable consorts, at least 2 of whom are currently on speaking terms with you. I don't think we should disturb your mother right now, he said warily. She's still enchanting those new books. I got the distinct impression she doesn't love being interrupted mid-project. Correct impression, but actually, that wasn't what I had in mind. You just told us the answer yourself, Colin. Oh. It is not an imposition, husband, Tiavatharis assured him, standing at his side in his own chamber and watching the ghosts carrying in stacks upon stacks of simple structural materials. Once within the wards of the chamber, he could vanish them into the storage rooms, whereupon the ghosts would flicker out of the way to make room for the next squad. These were made for me by an acquaintance of mine centuries ago, a conjurer and artificer, a potent combination of specializations for image. I used only a fraction of it, in the end, to set up my own chamber to my liking, and I have kept the rest mostly out of sentiment. He was a good friend, now long past. I know he would be much happier to see his works being put to use than sitting in my storage. Then I am doubly honored by the gift, Colin said, smiling up at her even as he teleported the next shipment into storage. These really are fantastic, too. It's like building blocks, but not for children. Like nothing. That's exactly what these are, said Phanorexa. At her request, Colin had set aside a selection of the structural objects for her to play with, or study, as she had irritably corrected him. She and Percy were both off to the side, now, assembling miscellaneous piles of things. He could see the appeal. The objects Tiavathyrs had donated were a collection of blocks, wall and floor segments, pillars, and supports made of stone, wood, and some alloy that clearly couldn't be Temesteel but was the same gold and bronze color. There were also windows, none of which Tiavathyrs had used in her own construction, both empty frames of wood and metal and some filled with glass. All of them were in large numbers, made to exactingly identical specifications, and came with a wide selection of fasteners and attachments which fitted neatly into notches cleverly placed along all the larger pieces. When assembled they snapped together with a precision beyond the scope of any non-timekeeper metalwork Colin had seen. No blacksmith could do this. It would take a team of engineers. Or, apparently, a magical artificer who had a dual specialization in conjuration. Phanorexa was just making abstract sculptures of building parts to test out all the different ways the connectors fit together. Percy had assembled an archway out of pillars and support beams and was now attaching fixtures to hang a door in it. It was good to see them having fun. Tiavathyrs' smile told him she agreed, though out of respect for draconic and royal pride, neither of them said so out loud. "What did you use to decorate yours?" he asked her instead. "Please don't take this for ingratitude, I'll be more than happy to just use them as is, and it would still be nicer looking accommodations than I've slept in recently. But the structures in your chambers definitely don't look like these." "Ah, have you not encountered the illusion function in the wards, then?" Colin blinked. "They can do illusions?" Knowing Atraximos, she said with a faint smile, "I suspect they were first designed to prevent any outside actors from bringing glamours or stealth in here. They are capable of controlling the appearances of objects in the collection, though. All those fancy display cases he used to have in this chamber? Plain wooden crates. Be glad you have the wards to handle them, else they might have given you splinters." Huh. Reaching out mentally into the storage, he found she was right. There were no beautiful gilt-edged glass-topped display cases, but only a large collection of rough wooden crates that hadn't been there before. Somehow that seemed utterly in character for Atraximos. Not only pompous, but lazy and cheap. It also caused him a prickle of unease, remembering he had first come in here under a stealth effect which these very wards had failed to defeat. Powerful as they were, he must never become too complacent about either his safety here, or the capabilities of the entity which was very much not done with him. Colin reached out with his mind, concentrated on Phanorex's increasingly precarious tower of fastenings and contraptions, and pictured something else. She jerked back in surprise as the stack of fastener-adorned blocks suddenly became a Rav Cabot-style obelisk, black marble engraved with an excerpt from Isaiah's writings on political philosophy and VE calligraphy on each side. "Do you mind?" the dragon said irritably. "Now I can't see what I am working on." Colin grinned at her and changed it back, once again revealing her base construction, and then changed it again so that all the pieces appeared to be solid gold. She snorted and resumed connecting a hinge to one side. "How unutterably gauche. I'm sure Atraximos would have loved it." "That's marvelous," Colin said with unfeigned enthusiasm, restoring her building blocks to their normal appearance and turning back to Tiavathyrs. "Once again, My lady wife, I find myself in your debt. I am certain you'd have stumbled across that function in your own time, she replied, smiling back. I know not what if any background you have in architecture, husband, so I will simply caution you that while these materials are the finest magic can create, they are not themselves magical. They are exceedingly difficult to damage and will hold up more weight than normal wood, stone, or metal, but physics still applies. Thank you, Phenorexa, for the demonstration. Phenorexa's tower had just toppled over as she attempted to hang a swinging shutter on one side of it. The young dragon made a disgruntled face and bent to begin disassembling her creation to try again. I wonder. Tiavatharis watched him expectantly, but the girls were too distracted by their own projects to react to Colin's murmuring, at least until he focused his attention and an entire house suddenly materialized a few paces away from them. Granted, it wasn't much of a house, just a glorified box, really, 1 story tall and with just enough floor space to fit a bed. But it had a floor and a roof, a flat one, a door and 2 glass windows. Ooh, Percy applauded. Now that is handy, Colin said with enthusiasm. The sorting function of the wards works really well with the interlocking pieces. If I can picture clearly enough what I want, it'll assemble it for me. Which is especially useful since I actually don't know a thing about architecture. As a finishing touch he added a layer of illusion, making the little freestanding structure match the timestone walls. Fake timestone seems like it could be a hazard, Phenorexa said skeptically. What if someone mistakes it for impervious and breaks these lovely irreplaceable pieces? Phenorexa, why would anyone be in my chambers trying to smash the walls? Do I need to remind you that Vanomax lives here? Oh, but that's absolutely wonderful. Percy enthused. It's so convenient. I wonder why all construction isn't done this way? I'm afraid that simply isn't economical, Tiavatharis answered, smiling with muted amusement. The ward network that makes this possible is comparable to a planned city in its own intricacy, and those building pieces are masterworks crafted by an archmage. If this solution could be scaled up, I'm certain Izairoa would have already rebuilt Rivkabit this way. Oh, that makes sense, Percy agreed, looking more crestfallen than Colin thought this disappointment warranted. In any case, Your Highness, Tiavatharis continued, I have a gift for you as well. Oh. Percy blinked owlishly, then looked confused, and then nervous. Oh, you don't have to do that. If I had to, it would not be much of a gift. Colin felt Tiavatharis invoke a quick piece of magic, too fast for him to focus enough to analyze the spell, and suddenly she was holding a segmented strip of gold, steel, and glossy red material. I realize I have no claim on Vanomax or his antics, but I cannot help feeling some responsibility. Besides, hospitality is a foundational virtue in all civilized cultures. Please accept this, in my earnest hope that it will make your time here more comfortable. Jewelry? Percy tilted her head inquisitively. She did reach for the bracelet Tiavatharis extended toward her, though her motions were hesitant. Oh, that's quite lovely. Thank you very much. I almost fear it would be wasted on me, though. I've been told often enough that adornments don't suit me. That is certainly debatable, Tiavatharis replied. But in any case, this is a more practical gift. That object is powerfully enchanted. Specifically, it is a potent anti-dragon charm. Anti-dragon? Colin repeated. If I'm not mistaken, Phenorexa added, frowning in consternation, is that not made partly from dragon scale? Yes. Your father's scales, specifically. His are the most likely to have been left lying around where mortals might find them. Why would you even have something like that? Tiavatharis gave Phenorexa a level stare, all trace of her smile gone. Immediately Phenorexa backed up, hunching her neck in an instinctive posture of submission that didn't work quite as well in this form as in her larger one. I ask only out of curiosity. In fact, There is a predictable chain of events resulting in the creation of artifacts custom designed to aid dragon slayers, Tevatharis answered after a long moment. It begins with a dragon up to something that clearly must be stopped, and more often than not ends with said artifacts in said dragon's possession, where they are usually squirreled away against the prospect of any future adventurer getting their hands on them. I should think there are more such objects in the Evervals than anywhere else in the world at the moment, and the lion's share of those by far in Atraximos' own hoard. I have managed to acquire a few here and there. I don't want to slay any dragons, Percy said nervously. You've all been so kind I'm skeptical it would even be called for, and I'm not that is. Worry not, Princess, Tevatharis said gently. That is purely a protective charm. I would caution you not to rely on it overmuch. It would avail you little if a dragon actually attacked you with hostile intent. However, that is not a likely prospect here. I will feel more comfortable if you have a measure of insurance against accident, carelessness, or temper tantrum. Since we have seen examples of all of the above from at least one of our number recently. Oh, well, that is incredibly thoughtful. Thank you very much, Father. Ice? Close enough, she said, smiling. Don't worry too much, Princess. We are well aware that our names are mouthfuls in the context of most mortal languages. I will caution you not to shorten them, however. Most dragons who are willing to talk to mortals at all will have a sense of humor about understandable slips of the tongue, but the giving of a nickname is a great intimacy, which will give great offense if it is unearned. Duly noted, yes, Percy said, nodding emphatically. And thank you very much for the warning. Colm took note of the warning, as well. He rather wished someone had thought to mention it to him earlier. I advise wearing that somewhere unobtrusive, Percy, Phenorexa suggested. Like around your ankle. I don't anticipate any specific trouble from it, but a dragon seeing such a thing unexpectedly might react unpredictably. And as I've recently mentioned, Vinomax lives here. Oh, that's a good idea, yes. Percy knelt, then overbalanced and fell onto her rump. From there she pulled her skirts out of the way, trying to reach her ankle with both hands full of the magical bracelet. She didn't appear to be very flexible. Would you like help? Phenorexa asked, fighting a smile. Yes please, thank you. Well. Colm made the little proof-of-concept house disappear back into storage in pieces. Now we are getting somewhere. The question then is what's the best way to arrange this place? Ladies, would you like to participate in the process? Or would you rather I bring out some more blocks for you to play with? We weren't playing, Phenorexa said acidly, baring her teeth up at him. I was, said Percy frankly. Those are extremely satisfying. He smiled at her, then at Tevatharis. She smiled back, and nodded once to him, deeply. Already, progress. Chapter 41. It did not matter how somber the mood in the palace or the city of Boisford was, it mattered even less how the queen suffered. There was work to be done, there was a nation dependent upon her. To be royal was to be responsible. This view was not universally held among the household, but that was fine. What mattered was that she held it, that she would not forsake her duty to the people for any reason. If her ministers and servants were redoubling their efforts to smooth her duties and head off any additional stress, well, for that she was grateful. She could not let them keep it up forever, or for long, but for a while at least she would accept the kindness. Henrietta von Holtzmann's eyes were reddened, but her expression was steely. Her only outward concession to circumstance was her lack of jewelry and choice of traditional morning dress of coarse black fabric in place of her customary formal gown. As the day drew to a close, she was still on her feet, carrying out her duties. These, blessedly, were finally tapering off. She was in fact conducting her final interviews of the day on foot, while on the move through the palace's lower halls on the way to her own suite. And the rest is boilerplate, Chancellor Rocklefort concluded, tucking his overburdened clipboard to his side in the customary signal that he was done actively dealing with business. All remaining petitioners would not be perforce entitled to your Majesty's direct attention even under normal circumstances, much less. As things are, I believe it would have been your Majesty's custom to grant these audiences in most cases, but I would advise against it in this case. I, your ministers, and my secretaries are well qualified to address all these issues. I will of course have reports for your Majesty's perusal forthwith. I am not incapacitated, Chancellor, Henrietta stated. Nor will I falter in the execution of my responsibilities. I am certain I have made myself unmistakably clear on this. My queen, had you a broken leg, I would bring paperwork to your chamber, he rejoined, unfazed as always by the bite in her tone. To make reasonable accommodation for terrible events is simply best practice. I do not permit my subordinates to work through illness, injury, or bereavement because it slows the pace and lowers the quality of their work precipitously, and imperils their ability to continue executing their obligations in the future. Claude, she warned. I assure your Majesty, he continued with a faint, cold smile, I am still ruthless enough to exploit your pain for political advantage. Unless the mood of the citizens has changed in the last hours. It is not, said Clarence, who was striding along on Henrietta's other side. The populace is overwhelmingly sympathetic. Rockleford nodded. We have expressions of support from the temples as well. Most of these annoying dabblers possess the sense to test the wind before putting themselves forward and will refrain from being pests for the time being, but some few have presumed to express impatience. It is my intention to eviscerate their political capital for that presumption, and thus spare us future headaches. Only tell me what words to whisper, Clarence promised, and I will see they reach the right ears. I appreciate you on even the best days, gentlemen, but never more so than at times such as these. Henrietta did not smile, it felt it would be a long time before she did again, but she permitted her expression to soften. They rounded a corner, and her eyes snapped instantly to the face of her spouse, approaching up another corridor alongside the courtmage. Etienne was drawn and tense as she felt. The princess consort was not so self-contained as her wife, but given her tendency to transmute pain into anger, no one dared think her weaker for it. Your Majesty, good, Cora de Cron said, brusque as usual. I'm glad we caught you before you retire for the evening. Is this urgent, Mademoiselle de Cron? Rockleford asked pointedly. Yes. It should also be brief. Your Majesty, I am about to depart for Dragonvale. To judge by the sharp look she gave the courtmage, this was news to Etienne too. Cora barreled on before anyone could interrupt her with a question. I apologize for having to drop these matters on you at the last minute, Your Majesty. It is due to my failure to make arrangements in advance, as I was not expecting to be called upon for anything so hazardous, so soon. I have no successor nominated at this time, but my recommendation is that you approach the Wizarding Guild called the Sons of Sarimath to put forward the next courtmage candidate, on the grounds that they are both competent and disconnected from Verity politics. Cora, Henrietta said firmly. Nothing in my chambers would be hazardous to a skilled practitioner, though I advise against letting a layperson attempt to sort through my effects. Any of the local wizarding guilds in the city will be competent enough to clean out my rooms at need. They will want to claim my research as payment, which is a normal arrangement I would advise you to agree to. They might also want a portion of my materials or tools. That is not customary, and they should be advised that all those objects are paid for by and thus property of the crown, and should be reserved for the next courtmage. Cora, Henrietta barked. I appreciate your diligence, but this is no time for you to go herring off on a quest. Your Majesty, de Cron said, finally moderating her customarily strident tone somewhat. I know how this sounds, but I promise I intend and fully expect to be back in a week, as hale as I am now. I value the already strained stability of this nation and my own life, not necessarily in that order, too much to take needless risks. When a risk is needful, however, some basic measures are called for. Again, I'm sorry I haven't set all this up in advance. I will get to work on that as soon as I'm back. And what exactly do you mean to accomplish in Dragon Vale? The Queen asked, ruthlessly clamping down on the sudden surge of hope that tried to rise in her chest. Do you actually believe you can retrieve? I strongly doubt it, Your Majesty. Even the normally curt and dismissive Courtmage looked regretful. I rather doubt I am a match for any of the Drakes, definitely none of the consorts. For the dread. Surely I don't even need to say it. It is my intention to gather information. And due to the caution this will require, I am regrettably unable to promise results. But the attempt must be made. I am betraying my own biases, Clarence murmured, but I agree. Information is always vital, and, painful as this is for me to admit, neither I nor my department is equipped to obtain anything of value from Dragonvale. Courtmage de Kron is our best option. Whatever else they are, Cora added, dragons are predictable. Their habits outlive our dynasties. This sudden rash of out-of-character actions tells me that something has changed with those beasts, and they clearly intend to make it our problem. I dare not risk provoking Emer Alafine, or any of them, for that matter, by getting too close, but if there is a chance of learning what has happened in Dragonvale, I must try. I understand, Henrietta said evenly. That being the case, your point is well taken. Very well, I approve your mission. Be cautious, Cora. We can ill afford to lose anyone else, much less incite any retaliation from them. My word on that, Your Majesty. A week, Clarence added in a deceptively mild tone. That is an impossibly tight timetable, accounting for travel. You are a conjurer by specialization, I understand. Surely you have not acquired the ability to teleport within the last year. It is the nature of wizards to hoard resources and artifacts against future needs, she said tersely. Far too many take these treasures to their graves. I am planning to expend some assets because I consider this worth it. Don't expect me to be able to do this regularly. Possibly not ever again. Disposable items that enable long-distance teleportation are among the most priceless rarities, Clarence said innocently. Surely for such a cost, you would be eligible for some compensation from the crown. Monsieur Clarence, she snapped, I do not pry into your innumerable secrets. I expect the same courtesy in return. Now, that is as fair a criticism as I have ever heard, he agreed, bowing. Be safe, Courtmage, and may every god to whom you pray look kindly upon your mission. She nodded curtly to him, then bowed deeply to the Queen. By your leave, then, Your Majesty. It is given. Take no more risks than you must, Cora. We need you. It's a promise. She turned and strode away at a rapid clip, rounding the next corner in seconds. Then I believe we shall take our leave as well, Rockefort said, bowing. Clarence did likewise. Rest well, Your Majesty, Your Highness. I shall have the morning reports for you as always. Thank you, gentlemen, said the Queen, inclining her head. Both of them retreated back up the hallway, and only when they were gone did she let her shoulders slump. Etienne stepped up alongside her, slipping an arm through Henrietta's. They were alone, but this was still a public hallway. That was the most she allowed, for now. How is he? Henrietta asked quietly as they resumed walking toward their rooms. Asleep, finally. Etienne's face collapsed into a pained scowl. I eventually had to give him something for it. One of Cora's tinctures? The cheapest brandy the sommelier had. He's in no fit state to appreciate quality. More to the point, he'll wake with a pounding headache that I dare to hope will momentarily minimize more important concerns, and teach him not to reach for chemical solutions to heartache. Henrietta, I do not like the feel of drugging our son to sleep. I just ran out of better ideas. Nothing I said would stop him from torturing himself. Henrietta closed her eyes for a moment, reaching an arm across to squeeze Etienne's hand. He was right there. He had to see it happen. Our son is more than sensible enough to recognize there was not a thing he could have done against a dragon. But the pain will have to recede somewhat before his sense reasserts himself. You remember being that age? Barely. Etienne held the door of their rooms open for her, eyes full of concern. "He will pull through," Henrietta said quietly. "He will. Franz has absorbed the best traits of both of us, on top of inheriting his father's compassion. This is not his fault, any of it, and in time he'll make what peace can be made." "How well are you enduring, love?" Etienne asked quietly, shutting the door and stepping over to her. For the moment, Henrietta simply stood in the middle of her parlor, staring vacantly at nothing. "It's not his fault," she repeated after a long pause. "No, we all know whose fault it was." "Henrietta, no." Etienne gathered her into a hug. "I sent them there," she whispered, slumping forward into her wife's strong frame. "I sent her there. Love, don't do this." "So she would be safe." Etienne squeezed her close, rocking them gently as Henrietta's reserve and control finally shattered under the pressure. Staring into the distance over her wife's shaking head, the princess consort's expression promised murder to someone. Verdi architecture was thick, the walls of the royal bedchambers as defensible as a fortress in their own right, both for the purpose of actual defense, and because of their cultural esteem of privacy. It was all the more important at times like this. The people of this city could not be allowed to hear their queen sobbing in broken anguish. The apartments of the cortege were lit at all times by verbening candles, the very simple enchantment providing enough light to walk through without stubbing her toe and a spooky ambience that she would never admit enjoying. The more powerful magical lights she only activated when working. In the open central platform reserved for ritual casting, a gleaming speck appeared in midair, expanding rapidly to settle into the shape of Cora de Cron herself. She gasped, staggering forward and clutching herself as she collided hip first with her own desk, jostling it and knocking pens and a letter opener to the floor. Cora hunched against it, barely catching her weight on both hands. Face twisted in pain, she let her head hang between shoulders screwed up with agonized tension. "Shut up. Stop it." Her whisper was almost drowned out by the others, by susurrations lingering just at the outer boundaries of human hearing, the breathy voices like dead twigs rustling in winter. Their words inscrutable, their messages clear only to the recipient. "Stop. Go away. All right, enough. Shoo, shoo, all of you. She's not for you. Go on, get out of here. Back where you belong, Pess." On the vague shape of her shadow cast across the floor behind her, movements that did not match her own took the form of her hands brushing around her head as if dispelling cobwebs. The soft whispering heightened in pitch, turning angry. Then fell silent as the voices from between the planes retreated from a power they did not dare cross. Cora breathed more easily in the silence, but was still hunched in pain. Limping, she stumbled over to her potion cabinet, knocking over bottles as she fumbled for a vial of standard healing potion. Her shadow remained stretched across the ground behind her exactly where she left it, folding its arms disapprovingly. "Young lady, what exactly are you trying to do to yourself? You know not to do that so lightly. You just saved, what, 5 minutes of walking? Right here in the palace. How exactly was that worth it?" Her throat moved convulsively as she downed the potion, and only then did she finally relax and straighten her posture. "Clarence went so far as to openly express suspicion of me," she said. Then had to pause and clear her throat before she could continue without the pained rasp in her voice. "That means things have changed. I need to train him not to bother having me followed around." "Cora, old buddy, when the problem is that the spymaster has his eyeballs on you, showing off powers he knows you shouldn't have is only going to make things worse. Come on, you know better than this. It's basic sense. Impaired judgment is a warning sign. Time to slow down, if anything." "I know what I am about," she snapped. "Trust me, I know Clarence. He doesn't think in terms of sense. Anyway, I have a week away to recuperate. I told them about Dragonvale. You think you can learn what I need to know in that time?" "Oh, please," the shadow said merrily, "I already know the broad strokes. What details can be gleaned, I'll get much faster than that. Not my first day at the races. Good. Perfect. She paused in the act of straightening up the items she'd just knocked loose, grimacing. That poor kid, though. Perseverance was a thoroughly useless person, but by no means a bad one. And nobody deserves that. Oh, aren't you sweet to be so concerned? But relax, I can almost guarantee she's fine. Having undoubtedly the most stressful day of her life, but in good health for now. I give it even odds she'll be back here safe in her own little bed not long after you are. Cora paused, turning to stare narrowly at the shadow still stretched across the floor. In a way I'll be able to take credit for. Doubtful. Not unless you want to risk Her Highness contradicting your story later, not to mention getting close enough for Imaralafine to land on you. But you should be back in plenty of time to be the bearer of good news, and that's not nothing. Right, yes, she muttered, absently scrubbing her palms on her trousers. Best not chance that. Not yet. I have more preparations to lay before I take on Imaralafine. Cora, friend, pal. Whoa. With the greatest of respect to your skills, there is no situation in which you're a match for the White Wind. This is exactly the kind of impaired judgment I was talking about. That's right, keep underestimating me, she said with a vicious grin, shrugging into her most heavily enchanted coat. I love it when people do that. I'm just gonna say it, you're exhibiting all the warning signs. You know you can stop at any time, Cora. I told you up front, the second you decide this isn't worth it, I'll get to work on finding you a solution to your problem. As if I'd trust you with that. I will find my own solution, after we both get what we want out of those damn dragons. I am not crazy enough to believe you have my best interests in heart. Not just yet. Why no, the shadow said, drifting lazily across the floor while she began sorting through her bags of holding. Even a creature like me has certain limitations to observe. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to get anything done, under the stricture that nothing I do can create an innocent victim? I honestly can't imagine it. That's why I need good folks like you. The shadow slid across the surfaces of the room, popping up right in front of her on the parchment where she was currently jotting down a note to herself for later. To score myself a usable catspaw, I need to find someone up to something they definitely should not be, and most frustratingly, I have to offer in good faith to help them with what they actually need, not just what they currently want. She snorted and turned away, crossing the room to her weapon rack. The shadow followed, posing on the adjacent wall as if leaning against the rack while Cora glanced between a staff and a rapier. And it has to be good faith, is the thing. My utmost sincerity and very best effort, should the offer be taken up. To be clear, Cora old pal, I'm not in a position to do anything directly about your little problem. But I have another acquaintance whose three favorite things are hopeless causes, helping people who manifestly don't deserve it, and knowing a guy who knows a guy. And even if she comes up short, I'll keep at it. Someone out there can do something for you. It's just a matter of finding the right ears to whisper in. In other words, my specialty. She chose both, buckling the sword at her waist and taking the staff in hand. As she turned her back, the shadow snapped forward, stretching once more across the floor in front of her, arms raised in a shrug. You can trust me because I'm not interested in you. You're a means to an end, Cora, and that means I gotta handle you a lot more carefully than I would one of my actual projects. So what'd I say? How about we drop this, get you some proper help? Even if that's true, she snorted, it means you chose me because you know I won't take you up on that. So don't waste my time. Now, don't sell yourself short. I swear, every single person I've found interesting enough to deal with directly has managed to surprise me. But, yes, I did pick you because I'm reasonably sure you're going to ride this horse until it bucks you, no matter what good sense I try to tell you along the way. There we are, then. Good luck in Dragonvale. I'll need you to come with me to Spider's Gorge first. Sure, Buddy, but I gotta tell you, my specific talents aren't going to help you much if you wanna wrangle Colossus spiders. Sweet of you to be concerned, but no. I plan to spend the week setting up my contingency, and I don't need you for that. Just the trip. Scowling in irritation, she took a deep, steadying breath. Making the transit without you would be rough. Offers on the table, Cora. Say the word and we can stop all of this. We had a deal. I do not intend to alter the terms. Now let's go. The shadow swept an elegant bow. Your wish is my command. Chapter 42. Good morning. Hello, Percy answered with less enthusiasm, emerging carefully into the kitchen where Colin was making breakfast. Help yourself, I'm just finishing up here, he said, scraping eggs around the pan with a wooden spoon, the pan handle glittering with jewels, the spoon made from an extinct tree and inlaid with silver. I have pears sliced up over there on the counter, with bread, butter, and honey. Hope you like scrambled eggs. Scrambled? She crept past him, peering at the food he laid out already. I usually have my eggs slightly runny, served over toast. Toast? Yes. Colin waited, and she said nothing, just picked up a slice of pear. Right, that was on him. He'd gotten to know Percy a bit while working to set up this kitchen and their respective sleeping quarters last night, and while he was of course far from a deep understanding, he had picked up on some traits he knew from his time in the Royal Archives. Toasted what? He prompted. She turned to stare at him, blinking. Toasted. Toast? Do you not have toast in Rivak? Well, we toast things like nuts and tubers, plantains. It's toasted bread. Huh? Really? Wouldn't that just burn it? Oh, but it's probably different with northern bread. Now, I've had Riva flatbread fried, that's quite tasty. Very heavy in the stomach, though, puts you right to sleep. This is what everyone mostly meant when we talked about being unprepared for mortal guests, Phenorexa announced, striding into the kitchen. You saw how easy it was to set up sleeping arrangements. Food is going to be the issue. It was a whole entire debacle, a couple of them, actually, getting a supply of food set up, but that just settles the raw ingredients. Good morning, Phenorexa, said Colin. Can't I help you? Scrambled sounds good to me. I've only had eggs raw. I'm rather curious what you can do. Colin sighed, marshalling his patience. The subtext was, what are you doing here first thing in the morning? I came for breakfast, obviously, she stated. Anyway, Percy, Colin was a scribe back in Rivkabad, and apparently he cooks about as well as you would expect a scribe to. You mustn't expect too much. I see. You've got some brass ones, barging in here, denigrating my cooking, and then expecting me to feed you. I am a dragon, she said smugly. Also, you're exacerbating an issue we already have. We've set up a supply of food for one human, which now has to be doubled, and I don't even know how to get in touch with our merchant contacts to arrange that. That's Iro's area, and she didn't come home last night. He'd checked before falling asleep, and first thing in the morning. She was still nowhere in the vicinity. Colin couldn't suppress the churning sensation this caused in his gut, but was trying to keep it internal for Percy's and everyone else's sake. I'm happy you have discovered the joys of cuisine, but maybe you could hold off until we manage to update the supply situation? How hard is it to modify your order with the merchant? Percy asked. Oh. I didn't mean for that to sound sarcastic. I actually don't know how hard it is. I was always firmly discouraged from getting involved with day-to-day maintenance around the palace. The servants didn't seem to appreciate my questions, and Mother told me not to interfere with their work. It's probably harder for us than it would have been for you, Colin explained, frowning at the eggs as he transferred them to a bowl. We can't just wander into town on a whim. That's always the case, but after Venomox abducted you, I have to assume your people right now are particularly wary. Well, I guess I could put in some more eggs, and there's more bread. Why don't you let me take over? Phanorexa asked condescendingly. I can see you are out of your depth, Colin. Phanorexa, I am reasonably sure you never tasted sugar before yesterday. You're seriously going to try to tell me you know how to cook? I have read several cookbooks, she stated, lifting her chin proudly. Perhaps you should have studied the subject before leaving home. Colin knew, in that moment, not only what the right thing was to do, but how to do it. He should gently distract and redirect her attention. He decided, knowingly and deliberately, to do the funny thing instead. Well, if you're sure, he said, giving her his most innocent smile. Considering how this is going so far, I wouldn't turn down good help. Perhaps you could make some of the toast Percy likes? Oh, and since we're adding a carnivore to the table, maybe fry up some bacon. If it's not too complex, of course, I wouldn't want to. Oh, please, what could possibly be complex about that? She snorted. Stepping over to the enchanted preservation box, the dragon reached in and retrieved a slab of bacon. That really was a very user-friendly device, essentially a larger bag of holding. Its storage capacity was greater than Colin would ever need. It kept its contents in suspension to ensure eternal freshness, and would immediately provide whatever the user desired to hand with no need to rummage. Right off the bat, he had to intervene. You'll need to slice it up, Colin said helpfully when Phanorexa grabbed the skillet he'd used for eggs without wiping it out first and started to put the entire chunk of bacon in it. It fries best in small strips. Ah, is that so? What a useful tip, thank you, Colin, she said primly. All right, shoo. You two go get started on what's already prepared, give me space to work. Use a cutting board, please. It's there you go. Phanorexa deliberately turned her back to him, saying nothing else, and began to carefully and meticulously saw at the side of bacon with a cleaver. Percy turned to Colin with a worried frown as he picked up the tray of bread and toppings, balancing the bowl of eggs in his elbow. He smiled and jerked his head toward the door. She blinked, tilting her head to match while still watching his face. Right. Colin stepped outside, and as he'd hoped, Percy followed, seating herself at the dining table while he laid out food. He had already set up 2 plates. It required a simple exertion of will through the wards to conjure a third. He considered the chamber to be in a preliminary state, still, but was pleased with the progress made thus far. Colin had begun yesterday's renovation by assembling a house for Percy, with input from her, though aside from requesting that he use the door she had built for its entrance, she seemed rather vague and disinterested in most of the process. And then, because symmetry appealed to him, he had built another for himself in an exactly matching configuration, but mirrored. They had a comfortable distance between them, being built at opposite ends of the vault itself, each along the back wall and wedged in a corner. The privacy was a bonus. Colin had decided on this arrangement because this enabled him to connect each house to one of the 2 timekeeper toilet facilities in this chamber. That these were recognizable for that purpose had at first taken him aback, but it was hard to mistake the point of a long room with fountains along one wall, and along the other a single long seat with regularly spaced holes, with a channel of running water beneath them. As far as Colin knew, this might be the first solid evidence that the timekeepers had actually been humanoid. Thanks to the permanence of their surviving works, Atraximos's wards, and Imaralafine's enchantments keeping the whole complex's water was clear, everything was spotlessly clean and in working order. The kitchen had been the most complex to build, but only because of its internals. The actual structure was the smallest and simplest of the 3, positioned against the rear wall equidistant between Colin's and Percy's houses, a simple room with doorways on 2 ends, and in front of it a dining area demarcated by standing pillars but left open to the room. The great, echoingly empty room. Colin needed to spend some time setting up more of an environment in here. His original plan to ask for Imaralafine's help in setting up the actual kitchen pieces was out, due to the ward's hostile reaction to her. But fortunately Phanorexa proved both knowledgeable about enchantments and willing to help. The magical pantry was easy enough, as were the equally magical oven and stove. A little counterintuitive to use, but simple enough once the runic controls were explained to him. The luxury of being able to cook without fuel was incredible. Much more difficult had been the kitchen water source. Fortunately, all the necessary pieces, each a rarity fit for an Archmage's house, had been present in Atraximos's collection. There was a tap that conjured water from nothing, which they'd positioned above a basin with a stoppable hole in the bottom, under which had been positioned an all-devouring artifact behind another device that Colin interpreted as a sort of magical sieve. The resulting portable hole was secured from any external access and would banish wastewater and wasted food particles and nothing else. Setting up the filter to those specifications had been entirely Fenurix's work. Colin had needed her insight to get all of it chained together properly. The end result was incredibly efficient. If only it wasn't wasted on one of the worst cooks alive. Well, he had time to practice, after all. "How did you acquire this food, if you can't go into the city?" Percy asked while he spooned scrambled eggs onto her plate. Her expression didn't look enthusiastic about the food, for which he couldn't blame her. "We, went into the city," Colin admitted. "Izyroa has connections with a trading company. She was disguised as a human, and seems to believe her presence was a secret. But after learning a bit about verticulture, I'm starting to suspect she may have been spotted even before now." "Oh, yes, it always caused my stepmother's stress when the dragons would visit," Percy agreed, now frowning as she spread honey on a slice of bread. He couldn't tell whether the frown was for the subject matter, the choice of food available, or the fact that she clearly wasn't used to doing this and was tearing up her bread. "Did they know every time?" he asked. "I'm not actually sure. I wasn't involved in state affairs. Specifically not involved. I was removed from the Rostrov. Well, that's a long story. Mother would only mention it sometimes after the fact, over dinner or something. It was a source of worry for them. I don't even know which dragons it was, just what royals generally know in the Avervals." "And? That is?" "Oh. Well, just that Atraximos was the only aggressive one. The consorts would sometimes go to human cities in disguise for various reasons, but they never did any harm because everyone was careful not to provoke them. And of course the drakes would be seen hunting in the wild, but they were mostly harmless if avoided. The red one." Her expression darkened. "That is, Venomax would sometimes breathe fire or roar if someone tried to get too close, but mostly they'd just leave if approached. I'm not sure how much of that is common knowledge and how much is royal privilege. I don't think most people are aware the consort dragons were ever inside cities. Mother always emphasized that was a secret." "I see," he mused. "Well, good. Having gotten to know them, this news wasn't really surprising, but it still gladdened him to hear that none of his new family were known to victimize innocent people." Percy raised her head, swallowing a bite of eggs. Do I smell?" "Yep." Seconds later, Fenurix herself emerged from the door, scowling and holding a small loaf of bread charred black and smoking. "There is a problem. How is this meant to work, exactly? When exposed to fire it does not react as the books indicated." You have to slice it, first," Percy explained, staring. "You toast the individual slices, not the whole loaf." "Oh. Fenurix tore the loaf in half. To Colin's surprise, most of its interior seemed untouched, despite the outside being now mostly charcoal. I see. The texture is different. No wonder." She turned and went back inside without another word. "Did she breathe fire at that?" Percy whispered, leaning toward Colin. "Surely it wouldn't get that burned if she just put it in the oven." "I have absolutely no idea what's happening in there," he said cheerfully, "except that valuable lessons are being learned. And really, doesn't that make everything worthwhile?" "Well, I can smell bacon frying now," she said doubtfully. "At the very least, the smell is appetizing." The princess took another bite of her eggs, and Colin couldn't help noticing she didn't seem to be enjoying the food much. At least she was eating, though. He needed to do something about this. "If we're low on food," Percy said quietly, "isn't it a problem for Phaneroxa to be, destroying it?" "I'm not going to let either of us go hungry," Colin promised. "We have enough for a few days even at our most profligate, and then. It's not that we can't get more, it's that all the options for doing so come with annoying drawbacks. 3 of the most powerful, versatile, and wealthy beings in the world live here. We will make do." "I see. Well, that makes sense, I suppose. More than that, I'm concerned about getting something you like. It was one thing when I was the only human eater in here. I'm accustomed to roughing it." "I don't want to be any trouble," she said quickly. "I am too constrained by habits, anyway. All of this is a great chance for me to have new experiences." "You're the opposite of trouble, Percy, and you're not an imposition. Remember what Tiavatharas said about hospitality? It is both a crucial virtue of civilization and a great source of satisfaction to provide comfort for a guest in one's home." Before she could answer, Phaneroxa emerged again, carrying a pan of bacon. "This is marvelous stuff," she said brightly. "I was debating how much oil to fry it in, but it turns out it doesn't need any. The fat melts as you cook it. How very convenient. And it smells." "Go finish cooking that," Colin ordered, reaching out to stop her before she could dump bacon, molten grease and all, onto Percy's plate. Phaneroxa scowled at him. "I just did. Look, it's cooked." "You've started. It needs to be thoroughly cooked. Remember? You were the one who had to explain to the family why humans can't eat raw meat." "It is not raw. I told you, I have read about cooking. Meat is best served rare." "Red meat, yes. Beef is best rare. Pork and poultry have to be thoroughly cooked, or they'll make us sick." Phaneroxa squinted at him, then at her pan of bacon. Colin took note that she'd hacked it into such ragged, uneven strips that most of the slices were practically wedges. "It looks plenty red to me." "Yes, red meat is a pretty arbitrary label. We should look up the etymology of the term sometime. I bet that's a fascinating story. Think of it as the designation for meat that can be served rare. Bacon is not red meat. Just cook it until it's curled and crispy and none of the white parts are still white, that'll be fine." "If you say so," she sniffed, then flounced back into the kitchen. "What cookbooks has she read?" Percy whispered. "If Imam Alafine's library is anything like the Royal Archives of Revkabad," Colin answered just as quietly, "cookbooks are collections of recipes written by and for people who already know how to cook. I've never seen an introductory primer on the subject. I think most people learn the basics in person." Percy peered at the kitchen door, then back at him. Why would she just read recipe books, then? "Phaneroxa likes absorbing knowledge," he said, smiling. "No doubt she has her favorite subjects, as do we all, but she also just loves learning." I am actually looking forward to spending some time in that library." "Me, too. Considering how little else there is to do around here, it's surprising I haven't already, but I have been fully occupied with the family. Despite how many centuries they got along just fine without me, it's incredible how much management I have to do with these dragons." "I don't think that's incredible at all," she said, gazing him in that earnest way she often did when saying something almost inappropriately direct. "Or rather, I question how well they were getting along. I've only been here a very short time and I'm notoriously bad at picking up hints, but even I've heard enough context to understand that the Dread was an oppressive ruler. It's been a real surprise to learn that all the rest of the dragons were as intimidated and abused by him as we were. But it seems to make a strange amount of sense in hindsight." "I think that is a very good insight," he agreed. "But it's probably a good idea not to repeat it in front of the dragons, or at least not in those words. They are very particular about their pride. Implying that they were ever weak or intimidated would offend them greatly, Ah, I see, she said, nodding. That is most helpful advice, thank you. I will try very hard to remember that. As for food, I'm going to see how good the Phantom Legion's cooks are. I've been skittish about Undead handling my food, but I fully understand, and for the record I'm also skittish about that same thing, she said quickly and emphatically. I would much rather eat your cooking than anything handled by ghosts and zombies. This actually isn't that bad, it's just not what I'm used to. Also, I hate to be demanding, but on a similar note, I'm going to need to acquire some new clothes somehow. She was, in fact, wearing the same black dress she had been yesterday, though she appeared to have left her tiara in her new residence. Oh, that's no problem, Colin assured her. I can easily provide. Colin, Percy interrupted, staring intently at him. This may be something you wouldn't understand as much, being from Rivak, but I cannot wear clothes that Atraximos the Dread took off the bodies of people he murdered. I'm sure they're all wonderful, or he wouldn't have bothered keeping them, but I just can't. No, don't worry, that makes perfect sense, Colin said swiftly. He had been less squeamish about that particular detail, personally, but it wasn't as if it needed any further explanation. I understand completely. All right, so, food and clothing. We may as well draw up a list of necessities. That'll give us something to do while I try to figure out exactly how to get these necessities. That's simple enough, Fenorex stated, sweeping back out of the kitchen with a pan of bacon in one hand and a platter of very singed bread in the other. That was fast, Colin said pointedly. Very fast. Did you just breathe fire at that? No, Colin, I am not a complete imbecile, which is the question you actually just asked behind the one you said out loud, she sneered. Applying higher heat would alter the chemical reaction occurring, everyone understands that. I used a small-time acceleration spell, that's all. It turns out that just standing over something while it cooks is a mind-numbingly tedious process. Colin examined her offerings. Percy did likewise, not succeeding as well at concealing her perturbed expression. She had clearly used the same loaf of bread for the toast as her first attempt, to judge by the charred black ring of crust around each slice. Aside from that, it didn't look too terrible. The browning on the formerly fluffy, and now crispy interior bread was actually rather intriguing. The bacon had not turned out as well. It was unevenly cooked due to the uneven cuts. Fenorex had obviously taken his warnings to heart and kept it on the heat until even the thicker parts had cooked all the way through, which meant the thinner parts had crisped to unappetizing brown lumps. And, of course, it was all still swimming in grease, which she had not drained at all. Anyway, Fenorex said briskly, thankfully setting down her handiwork on the table rather than trying to dump it directly in their plates again, shopping for supplies is simple. You have scads of money, it's just a question of where to spend it. It's only Boisford where we can't go, right? Most of the same concerns would apply anywhere in the Avervals, he said, and I also can't go to Rivak. What, are you a wanted criminal or something? She asked, grinning. I wouldn't have taken you for the type. I am not the type, Colin said very carefully. I have never committed any crimes in the Rivak Empire. He'd been convicted and sentenced, just hadn't actually committed any, and after leaving the Empire he'd done some stealing to survive. She didn't need to know any of that. It's a godling issue. The Nine have made it clear to me, in as many words, that they don't want any interlopers. Actually, with Isairo's backing we might be able to countermand them, but she probably doesn't want to stir up trouble in Rivak, and to be perfectly frank, I don't either. We have enough issues without pissing off nearby gods. All right, fine, Fenorex said dismissively, waving a claw. Colin took note that she did not seem in a hurry to sample her own cooking. That's still not a problem. Don't you remember we have a portal mage just nearby? Shadrach is actually very powerful, even more so with that staff you gave him, I should think. He can have us in any city in the world in an instant, or in several alternate dimensions. It's just a matter of selecting a suitable destination. Simple. Okay, hold up, Colin protested. Nothing is simple about involving Shadrach. The only thing more difficult than getting him to agree to help would be having him around while we go shopping. Wait, you guys know Shadrach Meshabeddin? Percy asked. They both stared at her. You know him? Fanorexa finally asked. Well, I know of him. He's supposed to be extremely powerful and accomplished for his age, and he decided to move in right next to Dragonvale. That kind of thing gets noticed and reported to the royal family. Also, our courtmage really hates him. Huh? The dragon mused. That's interesting. I wonder what he did to her. Unless she is a very agreeable person, Colin said dryly, all he'd need to have done was have a brief conversation with her. Cora is not a very agreeable person, Percy said seriously. She's sarcastic and kind of high-strung. I didn't dare ask why, she just starts snarling and ranting whenever his name comes up. Can you actually get him to help? There came a loud crunch, followed by pained silence. Fanorexa had just bitten into one of the pieces of toast, black crust and all. Her expression made everything worth it. Well, said Colin with a smile, we've got options. Tope continued,